I am a marketing coordinator for our Master of Science in Learning Design and Technology online degree program. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Expert Series webinar, Introduction to Agile for Instructional Designers with Megan Torrance. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping notes to review. First, our program academic director, Dr. Evans, has joined us for this session, and she will be monitoring the chat to help answer any program-specific questions that you may have. There will also be time at the end of the presentation to address any questions that we did not get to. After the presentation, we will share a few quick slides on important program information for those of you who are interested in starting your education journey with our program. This session today will be recorded, and you can expect an email to be sent your way with that recording by the end of the day today. Now that those housekeeping notes are out of the way, we want to acknowledge that we likely have a variety of attendees today. Some of you might be just getting started in this field, and some of you may already be in the industry. No matter where you are in your instructional design journey, we are so thankful for all of you joining us today. On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see a chat feature. We would love for you to jump in and say hello, let us know where you are tuning in from and where you are at in your career journey. Are you already working in instructional design? Are you working on moving into the industry? Are you a current student? Please let us know. All right, so let's get started. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our featured speaker, Megan Torrance. Megan Torrance is the CEO and founder of TorranceLearning, connecting learning strategy to design, development, data, and ultimately performance. Megan has over 25 years of experience in learning design, deployment, and consulting. Megan and the TorranceLearning team are passionate about sharing what works, so they devote considerable time to teaching and sharing about Agile project management for learning design, racial equity, and xAPI in learning analytics. Megan is also the author of titles such as Agile for Instructional Designers, Data and Analytics for Instructional Designers, and Making Sense of xAPI. She is also a facilitator with eCornell's Women's Executive Leadership Certificate, courses in virtual teaming, team leadership, and communication. With that, I will be passing the presentation over to Megan, so feel free to take it away.
Madison and everybody at San Diego, thank you so much. I am really looking forward to spending this time with you all and to connecting up around really one of the key skills that it takes to do our jobs in instructional design, and that's actually getting the project done. It's often interesting for me to connect up with other instructional designers because this field, as much as it's a very project-driven field, tends not to be a project management-driven field. And yet, this is how we actually get stuff done. So I like to think about this. I updated this slide deck and the last time I did that, I was looking at and just kind of centering myself around like, why do I do this work, right? And in the week prior to building this slide, all 5 of these things had happened to a team at TorranceLearning. All 5 of these things were big changes in our work, right? All of these were very, very disruptive. And yet, all of these changes were things we absolutely needed to know immediately, as soon as we did it, right? And the last thing we wanted to do was put up any barriers to telling us what those changes were, right? And for those of you who have worked in the instructional design space, and we have some prospective students, some current students, and some professionals out here, you may find that these are familiar. So you could take a note and put in the chat here, the numbers of the ones that are familiar to you and that you've experienced. I know typically people find something to resonate with or many things to resonate with. And here's the thing. As much as these were disruptive, as much as we wanted to hear about these things, right? And as much as we wish we had heard about all these things earlier than when we did, the people who told us these things, okay, were actually not trying to make our lives difficult. As much as it may seem like in the moment, they literally were not trying to make our lives more difficult. We just in instructional design are often the tail end of the communication channel for some of these things, or things are constantly changing. And the last thing we want to do is slow down that pace of change, right? So when I see learning professionals, right, being able to adapt and maneuver in the moment of change, right? What we think of is a target, right? Our goal is we have to still get our projects done on time, right? In budget, and we have to meet the need that we have been asked to fulfill, right? That's pretty much our gist here in the work that we do, right? On time, in budget, meet the need. And meet the need is the one that changes all the time, right? Although out in the world, on time and in budget can also change. So each one of these things is subject to change at the same time that we're trying to hone in on that. And I will let you in on a secret. If you are on a project that doesn't change from start to finish, it is entirely likely, not a guarantee, but entirely likely that it's not a very interesting project and people don't care about it. Projects that are interesting, projects that people care about, projects that are strategic and going to make a difference to the organization tend to attract attention, tend to be strategic, and tend to change. That's just by their very nature. And so I want you to be thinking about change in a project as a good thing to harness, not a bad thing designed to make your life miserable. Right? And I will say, while Agile is a number of very specific techniques, and we're not going to have time to go into those specific techniques today, it is both a set of techniques and a mindset. So we're going to talk about a little bit of both. When I see people who are delivering their projects on time, in budget, and meet the need. Oh, and by the way, if you are a fan of Kathy Moore's action mapping process that she describes in the book Map It, absolutely, that is entirely what I'm doing here right now, because that is an incredibly valuable technique and approach, and something that I use in my Agile work. So when I see people like all of us here in this session, right, who are delivering their projects on time, in budget, and meeting the need, one of the things, or two of the things they can do is they can actually build a case for using Agile, and they can describe that to others, right? They can convince others that that is the right thing to do. They do a number of things around project kickoff and getting things started that help to align the work with organizational goals, that help connect in to learner personas and appreciating our learners as people and segments. Oh, Dr. Evans, thank you so much for the link to her book. That book will set you back about $75, and it is about the best $75 you can spend on your career. And then also in that kickoff session, we're going to identify target outcomes. And those target behavioral outcomes are they connect very closely in with our learning objectives for any learning program that we might be designing. So what we're doing here is we're kicking off the project to set it up for success with using Agile methods. And at the same time, we're also connecting in with our business sponsors, the subject matter experts in our team, and making sure that we're all on the same page. While I'm in there, I'm also communicating that I am open to change. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, right? But I'm open to change, and I'm creating the avenues by which you can feel free to come to me for change, because we're going to be here and support that every step of the way. Once we've kicked off the project, then we have all the things that you might think of as project management, right? We're identifying work tasks and we're estimating it. We are going to develop and measure our work in iterations. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about iterations today. We're going to plan the project, right? Any one project has a plan. But then in instructional design, actually, those of you who are out and instructional design practitioners right now, do me a favor and put in the chat the number of simultaneous projects you're working on right now. So go ahead and do that, because we'll have the project plan, but then generally in our field, right, we are on multiple projects with multiple different configurations of teams. And so at scale, we need to be able to manage our projects and our resources, right? And finally, folks who are able to be in a space in which they're consistently and delivering their projects on time and budget, meeting the need, right? We need to build the environment for it in your own context and prepare to get started, right? So thank you, practitioners, right? 3, 7, 2, 5, too many. I've had people say I've run out of fingers and toes. And that is very common in our work. And so we need methods for managing that transition and that amount of switching. Now, oh yeah, 7 projects, right? We're starting to run out of fingers. We're getting close to running out of fingers. So here's the thing, right? This actually is the set of outcomes and the goal that I use for a full 2-day workshop on this approach. I'm doing the workshop next week in Orlando at the Learning Solutions Conference. I'm doing one May 3rd and 4th. I do this as a 2-day workshop, and often 2 days isn't quite enough to get through everything. And we've only got an hour here, actually less. We have 50 minutes left. So we're going to hone in on a few things. So I really want to talk about what is Agile and what is Agile in the context of an instructional design project. Right? I want to really hone in on a key piece of the project ignition, that project kickoff, where we're aligning with organizational goals. And then I want to focus in on one of the most visible aspects of an Agile environment, and that is developing and measuring in iterations. And what does that really look like? And so we're going to focus our time on those 3 objectives. As we go, please feel free to keep your questions coming in the chat. I can see both of them as we go. So keep the questions coming and we can make this a conversation. So what I'd like you to do for a minute is think about the best project that you have ever been on. It doesn't even have to be a learning project, but think about a project that had a start and an end, and you did it with a team. Okay. And now, right, the best project ever. I don't want you to think about what you achieved in the outcome, right? You scaled Mount Everest. You found peace in the Middle East. You cured world hunger. You won an award for it. The learners were happy with it. You got a promotion, whatever. Those are all outcomes. I want you to think about the experience of working on that project. What made it the best project ever? Now, put that, and usually in about 2 or 3 words, you can describe that. Put that in the chat. What made it the best project ever? I know as I think about that, some of my best project ever were where team members could be free to bring their own expertise and contribute that really freely. Right? Brian mentioned team collaboration, Julian, collaboration, right? And alignment, right? Lots of communication. Ooh, innovation, pushing boundaries. It was organized, right? Not just a hot mess, right? So all of these things. Often people tell us that their best project ever had senior leadership who was there to guide, to bust down barriers, and then to get out of the way. Right? I used to describe the best job ever for the senior leader was to show up with pizza on a late night, right? And then get out of the way. But they're there and they know that you're working. We also find that people tell us on the best project ever, they had fun. I'm talking like foosball fun, and there's a pool table in the break room. I'm talking about they enjoyed that work, right? And they learned something from it. One of my favorite Agile quotes ever is this one. Do more of what works and less of what doesn't. And when you think about an Agile approach to work, it takes all of those things that we identified as the best project ever and tries to bake them in intentionally, as opposed to having those kind of accidentally happen. And it's kind of serendipitous that we end up with a great team, and serendipitous that we have a great sponsor, and serendipitous that we have great communication. Like, what if we could bake all of this into the methods by which we work? And that, in a nutshell, is what Agile is. But don't worry, I still have another 45 minutes, so we're going to get a little bit deeper. Here's the thing, right? Our projects are subject to an incredible amount of change. And we typically build our projects using a framework that looks kind of like this. And yes, I'm exaggerating a little bit. But there are a few things wrong with this. Actually, I'm going to let you tell me, what are there are several things wrong with this model. And this is one of those situations in which there's multiple right answers. So what do you think? What's wrong with this model? I'm going to get a drink while you answer. One answer for the astute designers in the room is that the word evaluation is in a smaller font than everything else. And I will say that's intentional because we don't do a lot of evaluation in our space. We know we should. Okay, so yes, a small amount of time dedicated to evaluating. It's a waterfall, right? It is hard to go back upstream. In fact, if somebody says, you need to go back to the drawing board, and this is the model you're working with, that's a really hard meeting to be involved in, right? And so there's a number of things. It's very rigid. It's hard to make changes. And actually, since I'm not doing my testing and my evaluating to the end, I'm actually implementing something that I don't know will work, right? I am not evaluating whether or not my solution works until after I have implemented it, right? This also assumes that I'm doing all of my thinking up front, right? Before I start spending the big money that really happens in the development and implementation phases, right? I've done all my thinking up front, but what if something changes? We know things change, right? So this, to Jenna's point, is too rigid, right? It's hard to make changes. And one of the things we absolutely know about project planning is that the first day of the project is the worst day to plan it. It's the day on which we know the least about what's going to happen. And yet, right, we also know that we cannot simply chase every single squirrel that runs across our path. And so we need a way by which we incorporate change into the project in a way that is not disruptive to the project, but rather leverages us into building a better outcome because we have seen that change. And so here's how I draw that ADDIE model. I start with analysis and design and development. That's not a bad plan. It is not at all a bad plan. It's just that, right, I then need to get that some airtime. I do an implementation and an evaluation because implementation doesn't mean much if I don't evaluate the results, right? So I do an implementation and evaluation very, very quickly in my timeline. I get it out to users. Now, this isn't the whole project. It may not be finished. It might be kind of rough around the edges. It might just be a PowerPoint or a sticky note version of it. Crayons and interpretive dance. Something by which I can test whether or not I'm on the right track and where I need to focus my attention. And that's going to then fuel another round of design and development. Okay? That is the intentional going back to the drawing board and the intentional look at whether or not I have got the right answer. And maybe I'm even asking the wrong question. We've done that before. And I'm going to keep doing this, right, until I run out of time or budget or things worth fixing. So this is basically, in a nutshell, the mindset for Agile in an instructional design space. Okay? It is not purely waterfall where I build out whatever I design, right? And I implement whatever I built out. I am actually intentionally checking in and making sure that we are actually solving this every step of the way. Okay, so let's talk about what that means and how we think about this and how we describe this to other people, right? Because Agile is a big buzzword, right? Everybody loves Agile. Right? But there's a lot of things that Agile isn't, right? And a lot of misconceptions about what it is. So Agile itself out in the world, right? It's an iterative and incremental method. And we just talked about that, right? Iterative and incremental method of guiding a design and build project. And that means it has a start and an end, and I'm making something that didn't exist in the beginning. Agile methods, okay, exist in a highly and flexible and interactive manner, right? And some of you mentioned, we were talking about the best project ever, right? You mentioned that ability to collaborate and innovate and push boundaries. That doesn't happen in a static environment. We're focused on maximizing customer value. And customer value is not just talking about the sponsor of the course, but the learners who are going to participate in it as well. And we foster high team engagement because, and that's our team, right? Our design and development team. That high team engagement is how we're going to go about the consistent and the sustainable, right, engagement on our design team. Okay? We can get anything done by yelling and screaming, but we only get it done once that way. After that, it seems to be a little bit less useful. Now, in 2009, I started exploring the use of Agile. And most of Agile in that context, Agile comes from the software world. Most of what I could find, in fact, all of what I could find about Agile was in a software environment, and it didn't quite work for instructional design. Software is kind of like instructional design, kind of like eLearning especially, right? But not exactly. And so our team started making tweaks and modifications to the core approach to Agile. And that's why we call it Llama. It's a lot like Agile management approach, right? And it's a whole lot easier to remember. So at its core is this thing called the Agile Manifesto. And in the Agile Manifesto, right, we talk about uncovering better ways to do our work. So here, let me just get out my snazzy pen, and I'm going to say, instead of software, I'm going to say learning experiences, right? So remember, it was designed by software developers. We're modifying it for us, right? There are 4 value statements in the Agile Manifesto that are really key to how we do our work, right? Through this work, we've come to value working software over comprehensive documentation. Now, hold on just a second. Learning experiences. Okay. This means I would rather have a fantastic session today here than have a perfectly honed set of facilitator notes. Are facilitator notes valuable? Heck yes, but not at the expense of the working learning experience in the first place. Right? So what this means is that when I have a limited amount of time, budget, and resources, I'm going to focus that on giving value to the customer and not, and so we're trying to eliminate a lot of excess paperwork or whatnot, right? We value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. I would far rather deliver you what you need now that 3 or 4 months into the project, we've actually figured out what we need, than adhere to a contract that was developed back, well, you know, we developed those contracts. Wait, hold on. I'm going to go back to the slide. On the first day, which is the worst day to plan what the end project will be, and the contract for the work, right? And whether you're doing a contract that's formal or informal, right? Like a project charter or just an agreement with someone about here's what it is we're going to build for you, right? Why? Because we value responding to change over following a plan, right? We value being able to adapt over saying, oh, that's not what you agreed to. 2 weeks ago you said, right? That actually doesn't work in the world. It's also kind of a career limiting move. It may short-term feel better, long-term it feels worse. And so getting past that, right? Now, these 4 Agile principles, right? Somehow we only ended up with 3. Oh, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. How did I forget that? How did I miss that, right? So what we are looking at is valuing that humanity and the human connection with each other over the software tools, which might be surprising because today you can find an awful lot of software tools to support Agile. And I'm focusing on that human connection part. So there are also, in addition to the 4 awesome, but also kind of vague value statements around Agile. There are 12 Agile principles. And what I love is the fact that different principles apply to different people at different parts in their career and different projects. So my question is, take a look at these, and in the chat, put in the numbers of the ones that are interesting to you. Which ones really kind of jump out at you as being really interesting? Okay, 4. Right? Business people and project team must work together daily. Right? I like that. I don't always get daily, but I do get weekly. Right? We weekly touch base with our project sponsors. It's pretty valuable. Lots of love for number 10, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. If you find out that something is useless, stop doing it. Right? And really that frees your time up to do something more useful. Lots of love for that. Number 2 gets lots of love. Welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Right? It's really harnessing that change. Some people, especially if they're working on software projects, like, oh my gosh, the software keeps changing. Well, what are you going to do? Build the training for the software that was the way it was 4 weeks ago? It'll be wrong, right? Change happens. Change happens because people are trying to make things better. Right? Number 12, of course, here in a learning space, right, San Diego, right, we're thinking about, right, that regular learning, that regular project retrospective. Our projects every month have an opportunity to come together with me and review the work. How are we doing? How are we working together? It's not just the product, but the process. That's actually really the important part in that retrospective, right? So lots and lots of things, right? And what I love, if you look at what other people are putting in the chat, everybody resonates with something a little bit different, right? And so that's a big piece too, right? Different things are going to be important at different periods of time. These were written about, 20 years ago, before Zoom existed and before Teams existed, right? So working together in a face-to-face spot was important and necessary for communication. In fact, I knew of an Agile team, it was a software team that worked at Ford, and the software team was split. They had some in Michigan and they had one team in India. And at the beginning of each new project, hold on to this, they moved an entire team either from Michigan to India or India to Michigan, okay, in order to work together for the entire first work sprint to build the interpersonal relationships that were going to sustain them through the around the clock and globally separated nature that they were generally going to work in. I'm like, man, what a commitment to team effectiveness, right? Okay, so if we think about the fact that, right, when somebody asks us, right, about Agile, right, we can start talking about some of the ways in which Agile might make our lives different and better. And those principles really, to me, drive home, and the values, right? They drive home how Agile is different and better than what I might be doing otherwise in a waterfall-shaped approach, right? Now, Agile and for software is different than Agile for instructional design. So we're going to do things a little bit differently than our software friends. So if you walk out of the building and you run into somebody who builds software and they're like, yeah, I use Agile too. It's probably a different approach to Agile, and that's okay. Right? What I'd like to do next then is look at, when we're in that kickoff session, how do I align with organizational goals so that we're building the project with an agreed upon end in mind, or at least what we think the end in mind is today. Right? Often when I ask people why a particular, out in the world, and they're like, oh, I'm just on this horrible project, right? And I say, well, what went wrong? They're like, well, we were doing this project. Turns out that's not what they wanted. And I thought, That's why we come together as a team and identify what the goal for the project is in the beginning, so that we don't start running down the wrong path. I love this quote. And funny enough, it takes an hour, sometimes more, to define the project when I'm working with a client. And here's the thing, by the time somebody gets me in a project kickoff session, they have already decided that there's a problem. They've decided that training is the solution to the project problem. They've gone out and looked at a variety of different suppliers who could help them with that and agreed that our solution will be the best one. And then I have the nerve to show up and say, hey, so what are we doing here? What's our goal? Now, I've learned to ask that in a slightly more artful way, right? But the thing is, the goal is never to create training. Even if what they do is they call you up and say, hey, can you build me a 6-hour program to do blah, 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 blah? That's not their goal, right? The goal is to actually do something of value for the organization, something that helps us increase revenue or decrease cost or improve the product or the service, grow people's capacity, follow the rules, or serve the mission, right? The goal isn't to create a 6-hour course. The goal is for people to sell things better, to be able to set up and run manufacturing equipment and not cut their fingers off, to be able to take care of other humans in a particular way and in a way that isn't going to cause more harm, right? That's the goal. That's where we focus. Right? And by the way, the learner's goal is also not to complete your training, even if it's required training, right? Whoops, there we go, right? Even if it's required training, their goal is not to complete your course. Their goal is to do their jobs better. And your challenge is to help find the overlap between the organization's goals and the learner's goals. And I will tell you that if there is not an overlap here, training is probably not your solution. Okay. So the overlap of, right, the learner's goals and the organization's goals is a fantastic sweet spot in order to work and build your training from, right? Build any learning program from. Along the way, the learning team itself will also have some goals. Right? So the learning team itself will have some goals. So here's what I would like you to do, right, as we're working here. And I'm loving the fact that I can, I'm echoing Dr. Evans here as far as quotes and slides. We did not prearrange that, by the way. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like you to think about a learning design challenge that you're working on right now. Could be in your job if you already have the job. It could be in your coursework. If you're a current student, if you're a prospective student, it could be something from that you could imagine you would be building a learning program on. And so what I'd like you to do is, right, just type it, right, so you're going to have, right, project, and then you're going to have the org goal is a certain thing, and then you're going to have the learner goal is a certain thing. So let me know in the chat. This may take a couple minutes, but this is an opportunity to practice this. And I'll type in an example too as we go, right? So I have a project for a client, and it's the project crisis management and communications, the org goal, respond to crisis with the right message by the right people. Learner's goal. Okay, So here's my example, and you can be thinking and following along your own stuff. So I have a project that we're working on with a client on crisis management and communications, right? And originally the charge, they called us up and they said, hey, can you build us a course? Sure, we can build a course. That's what we do, right? But as we got in, we said, okay, so what are your goals, right? The first response was to build a course. Great, got that. Why are we building the course? We get down to it, and this is where it takes about an hour to parse this out, and you've got to have the right people in the room to do this, right? The organization wanted to be able to respond to crisis, right? Like their company's in the news and something horrible has gone wrong, or something that feels horrible has gone wrong, right? The organization's goal is to respond with the right message by the right people. Right? And there were two pieces of this, right? So the right message has to do with having collected all the correct information from within the organization, right? But crafted in a way that was consistent with how the organization wanted to respond. So it's right message had two different parts, and right people were to make sure it was very, very clear to the press and to government regulators and whoever might be involved in the crisis, who to go to for communication, not just anybody, right? But the right people to go to, right? So that's the organization's goal. The organization's goal is not to have a course. The organization's goal is to be able to respond to crises. The learner's goal, everybody wants to help, right? There's a crisis and everybody wants to pitch in and they think they have something to add value, and nobody wants to make the situation worse, right? And so here there's an absolute overlap here, okay? Except prior to having this learning experience, people didn't understand what the process was, that there was a process, and how they were supposed to fit into it. And that's what the learning experience was about. And so it was like, aha, right? Completely shaped. What the business sponsor thought they were getting out of this course was completely different than what we ended up building, because we got to the root cause of something that was actually going to solve their problem. Okay, so we have an example. A project is shifting course content from on-site to a hybrid model. Okay, right? That feels like something a lot of people are doing. The organization's goal is to make sure no content is lost in the transfer. The learner's goal is to split the content equally in the hybrid model. Super, super interesting. I'm actually going to say that often this kind of thing falls for me in the learning team's goals. Here's why, right? The organization doesn't want a course. The organization wants excellent performance on the job. I'm assuming that we're not talking about a higher ed kind of environment, right? So I would typically say, so the organization might want a particular course to happen. Learners want a particular performance to happen. The learners want to be able to do the job performance, and the learning team's goal is to shift it from one platform to another without losing content. And the reason why I say that's the learning team's goal, or a learning goal, administration goal, is simply because without the organization's actual performance goal, this moving the course content wouldn't even exist. Okay. Okay. So in a higher ed context, then that does take a slightly different vein, right? So in Julian's case, train future leaders to be capable of training end users effectively. Feels like the organization's goal is to have end users do whatever they're supposed to do effectively. Right? The training is how we get there. The learner's goal is understand how to use the software application to do their job. You know what? So everybody, this is great. Julian, thank you so much for this example. What we're going to do is we're going to take the understand how to off. Right? It's important, but at the end of the day, if I have to choose, right? So I'm going to parse this out. If I have to choose between understanding and using the software, I'm going to go for using the software. Understanding is a way to get there. Okay. I think of it as it's like having teenagers. They know what you're supposed to do, but they don't do what they're supposed to do. So understanding and knowing is clearly not sufficient for performance. Fantastic. Hey, thanks everybody for participating in this little case study exercise. That goal alignment, if you can imagine, this playing out in a project, that goal alignment is super important to make sure you're actually solving, right? This gets to that meet the need part in the middle, right? If I don't know what the need is, it's super hard to meet the need. So let's take a look at the last part that we'll talk about today in terms of really unique things related to Agile methods, and that is around iteration. How are we designing and planning for getting more information about the project in while the project is still happening? This is my first Agile mentor, and he is about 15 years older than he was in this picture. And when I first met him, he and I both have more gray hair and less hair, more wrinkles, but still smiles. Now, Rich Sheridan is an incredibly optimistic guy, right? I'm not going to say that you will skip all of the big mistakes in life simply because you're finding them when they're little mistakes, but you actually do mitigate the number of big mistakes by finding them when they're small. And another book that may be part of your curriculum, or should be, if it's not, should be part of your personal curriculum. I am not telling Dr. Evans in San Diego what to put in the curriculum, but this book, Leaving Addie for Sam, and SAM stands for Successive Approximation Model, which is another way to say iterations, right? This book is a really great way of laying out how we think about iterations. Here's another diagram, and I love this one. In fact, I love it just because it's so bitmappy and nasty, but it really gets to the heart of what it is we're trying to do here, right? I'm going to do some analysis and some design. Right? I'm going to do some coding, or in our case, right, development, right? And then we're going to test it. And if I'm finished, I'm going to stop. And if I've got some things I need to fix, I'm going to fix them. And I'm going to do another round of design and development, right? This is the iterative mindset by which I am not presuming to put out a perfect answer from the start without having done several rounds of testing to make sure that I'm on the right track, right? So I talk about each one of these loops as an iteration. If you hang out with folks who do software, you may have heard the word sprint before. So I see an iteration as a work effort that creates a releasable product that I can test. A sprint is a time period. Right? It's a commitment of work over a particular time period. Sometimes the sprints and the iterations line up, sometimes they don't. And that's okay. We don't have to have a big, we don't have to worry about it, but I talk in iterations, right? And each iteration is something that we call the minimum viable product, or the next minimum viable product. I am building the simplest thing that could possibly work to test out this concept. And that's my MVP. So for example, instead of building a whole course, I might build a job aid or a poster. Right? If I have no time, no budget, no resources, and I need to get people to do things, I could start with a poster. And then I get to have created something that tests whether or not I have the pieces of the poster correct. Okay? And test which parts do people do just fine just having a poster or a job aid? And what parts do we need to dig in a little bit more deeply? Or I might have a Word document or a PowerPoint outline or a wireframe or some sort of prototype or some smaller piece. And I'm getting that in front of real learners. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times when we're doing these iterations, right, it's very common for people to ask the subject matter expert. Like, hey, did I get this right? That's a good question to ask. They'll ask the business sponsor, hey, are we on direction? Is this meeting your needs? It's a great question to ask. They may ask the instructional designer who sits next to them, hi, is this instructionally sound? That's a great question to ask. They may ask an editor, hey, will you check and proofread this? And again, a great question to ask, but not a single one of those people, not the subject matter expert, the business sponsor, the instructional designer sitting on one side, the editor on the other. Not a single one of those people has to use that learning to do their job. Your best assessment of whether or not you are on the right path with your minimum viable product is to get someone from the member of the learner population to actually test it. Even if it's in a pre-done, ugly, not totally formed up yet space. Okay. Why do we do this? We're catching our errors early, right? The whole making small mistakes instead of big ones, right? Also, always have something usable, right? So even if priorities switch and I have to go set this down and go off and do something else, I've got something usable in the meantime, right? It's easier to estimate because I'm just estimating the iteration right in front of me. And I will tell you, it is psychologically way more satisfying, right? I get a little boost of dopamine every time I get to like, woohoo, I shipped a thing. Here it is, go take a look. Admittedly, there's also sometimes a little bit of stress, right? So anytime you like send the thing out, right? But it's little doses of stress as opposed to not talking to anybody for 6 months and then releasing this great big thing that nobody's ever had any eyes on, and you have no idea if it's going to work. Now, here's the other thing. You can actually release faster when you release in small iterations. Here's how this goes. It's not that the work moves along faster, it's that you have something that's releasable and usable earlier. A lot of times people will call me out, hey, Megan, I need you to build a learning program. And I'll talk to them, blah, blah, blah. Great, that's about a 12-week project. And they go, oh, we were really hoping to have something in 3 weeks. Great, you can have the first iteration in 3 weeks. That is entirely reasonable. And then you're going to take that and you're going to get us feedback and we'll continue to build on the rest of the iterations. Unless what we can do for you in 3 weeks works, which we'll only know when we test it with learners, and then we're done. Okay? So lots of different ways to be thinking about this. How do we do this? We actually do this all the time. Instructional designers do this all the time, right? The how is not quite so complicated. It's just a matter of deciding it in the beginning, right? So here are a couple of examples. We released at TorranceLearning, we released our COVID-19 course on March 11th, 2020, right? I live in Michigan. It was one of the very first 3 states to shut down. We weren't even shut down for a week afterwards. Right? We already had a course out. Was it our best work? No. Did we have, professional actors? No. On the top right, you see Jamie. She's our office manager. I'm in the middle. The instructional designer, Molly, is on the right. Right? We also designed this, right, using existing templates. So we just kind of grabbed whatever was around, right? And a video setup that we had already set up for a different program. And we knew content was going to change rapidly. We didn't know what was going to change. We knew it was going to change rapidly. So we built in small modules. Each one of these comes from a different video, right? So it's super easy to change just one slice part. And that way, when the CDC said, nope, actually, you should be wearing masks, right? We just stuck Molly back. We got Molly a new shirt and we stuck her back in front of the video and we shot that one again, right? Nothing else had to change. Okay. So we're designing knowing that we might have to change in certain situations. We built a learning program and an app for Michigan Neurosport that helped student athletes with concussions track and learn about their recovery from a concussion. Okay. We had 3 different learner personas. And what we ended up doing, we had 3 learner personas. We were supposed to build an app, and the university team only had a grant for $10,000. And she said, what can we do? I said, well, we can't build this whole big thing, and we can't build it for every phone platform. So the first one we built on iOS just for students. We didn't have any of the other administrative modules. The second iteration, we fixed it, the iOS bugs, and we built it out for Android. Right? Each iteration earned us, right, the grant money to take the next step, but also got us feedback from real learners out in the real world on how it was working. We worked on a course for Vitamin Angels. They deliver, they're actually based in Santa Barbara, nearby you. So we built a course on how to deliver micronutrient supplements. This little girl is having vitamin A that is being dropped into her mouth, and she is following the proper protocol by having her caregiver or mother hold her mouth open, and the healthcare worker is not touching her, right? And we built this out first in English. And then as each local unit needed translation, we used that as an opportunity to make updates and translate as we brought out a new version. Last example, this was a super fun course. We built two super fun program. We built 2 courses for Zing Train on customer service. And the 2 courses, don't tell them this, the content was about the same. They're both about customer service, right? And the early days of mobile phone, or putting training on mobile phones, right? As Flash is kind of being dismantled, and we're trying to figure out how do we put learning programs on phones. And what I wanted to know was, do people want to learn by scrolling up and down like websites, or across back and forth like the e-learning authoring platforms were putting out at the time, right? And so what we did was we built one that scrolled up and down and one that scrolled horizontally. And we then used xAPI to get really great granular data about how people use the course. And we wanted to see, is there a difference in, right, which one do people prefer, going vertically or horizontally? And we told the project sponsor, because we were just so curious, right? We told the project sponsor, if there's one of these that does not perform well, we will rebuild it the other direction. In the end, what we found out, that it had no difference. There was no difference in how people engaged in the courses, whether they had to scroll up and down or horizontally. Well, the difference in engagement had to do with whether or not it was obvious what you were supposed to do on the screen, right? So think about, we built this in Domino, but so it had like carousels and videos and branching things and things you were supposed to click and things you were supposed to drag. And if it wasn't clear, it was a very, very interesting usability use case, right? If it wasn't clear what people needed to do, that was the problem. It wasn't whether or not which direction they were scrolling. So there you have it. We have looked at 3 of the big things relative to Agile in an instructional design context, right? What even is it, and how do I start building a case for doing something different, right? When I'm kicking off a learning program, how do I align it with the goals of the business sponsor so that I can make sure that I am solving the right problem, right? And then how do I develop and measure in interaction or iterations? We have some great questions that I'll address real quickly and then wrap up. So we have a question from Julian. What are some methods to receive learner feedback, surveys, or whatever? The short answer is whatever we can. So whatever we can do to get feedback from learners is what we'll do. Sometimes it's directly from inside the course. Sometimes it's by watching them take the course, like a usability study. Sometimes we're giving them the ability to comment throughout the course in the platform in which they're reviewing. And sometimes we're surveying them. Sometimes, even better, we're looking at whether or not they can do the intended task on the job afterwards. Great question. Brian has a question. How do you handle the amount of iterations with a fixed timeline and scope? Oh, good question. When we are in the planning phase for a project like that, Brian, we are actually talking about what our iterations are and how many we're going to have. So during the planning phase, we're doing that, and we estimate that out as far as our resources and our cost and our timeline. So we're able to hone in on that. But then we also have an agreement with our clients where we talk about the fact that there might be more iterations, and so it might cost more or less. Right? So good questions. This has been a fantastic group. You know, I am super eager to connect up with any and all of you. I put my LinkedIn in the chat. And so you're more than welcome to connect up with me. If you're going out to a conference, I would love to see you. So by all means, reach out to me. If you reach out on LinkedIn, let me know that this is where we met up so that I have that context. And I'm going to turn it over to the San Diego team to talk a little bit more about the program.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much for that presentation, Megan. It was amazing. So as we discussed at the beginning of our session today, we wanted to share some additional information about the program if you're interested in pursuing our Master of Science in Learning Design and Technology at the University of San Diego. So on the next slide, you'll see that our program is made up of 10 3-unit courses for a total of 30 academic units. And the program is designed to be completed in 5 consecutive semesters over 20 months. Each semester is 14 weeks long, and students will focus on one 7-week class at a time. On the next slide, you can review the admission requirements, which are also listed on our website if you'd like to review them further. During the application process, you will be connected with a dedicated enrollment advisor who will help you make sure you have all of your application materials ready. And then once all of your documents are good to go, they will formally submit the application to Dr. Evans. Should you be accepted, you will then be enrolled in classes and start your orientation. We do want to call out that the summer 2023 semester is just around the corner and the application deadline is approaching. If you're interested in applying, please know that the final application deadline is April 10th and the term will begin on May 9th. I know that's really close, so please note that applications are accepted on a rolling basis, so feel free to apply and you can also start later in the year. We are happy to provide you with an application waiver code as a thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions or if you would like to receive that application waiver, please connect with an enrollment advisor and they'll be happy to help you. To connect, later today, you will receive an email with the recording of today's session, and in that email, there will be a contact us form that you can use, or please feel free to visit our website or send us an email, and I will put our link and our email address in the chat. I'm also going to re-put Megan, it was already there. I already have it copied, so I'm just going to copy that over as well as our LinkedIn profile as well. So there's a bunch of links for you to be able to use to connect with us. Alrighty, thank you again to Megan for her presentation today, and thank you to Dr. Evans for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's session, and please feel free to visit our website to learn more about this program. Thank you.